Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Nights. This is Kevin, and tonight we'll journey to a medieval town where healing herbs and ancient remedies fill an apothecary's candlelit shop. But first, find a comfortable position, and if you can, let your head rest softly on your pillow, as gently as evening settling over the castle walls. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it gently out, like mist rising from the cobblestone streets. Feel the weight of your body sinking into your bed, heavy as ancient wooden doors closing for the night. Relax your feet, your legs. Relax your hips, your back. Just let your shoulders drop, releasing tension like leaves falling from autumn leaves. Feel the peace flowing through your neck and head, smooth as herb-scented oils. With each breath, you're drifting deeper into comfort, wrapped in tranquility like a merchant's finest velvet. Now, as your body grows heavy, let me take you to a story that begins on a stormy night in a shop where remedies bubble and wisdom waits in glass jars. Inside the medieval apothecary shop, dried herbs hung from weathered ceiling beams in neat bundles. A fire crackled beneath bubbling copper pots, filling the air with the sweet scent of healing brews. The apothecary worked methodically in the dim light, grinding leaves with his mortar and pestle, while checking each jar's contents against his inventory list. Rain pelted the leaded glass windows as evening settled over the town. He paused his work, listening to the steady drumming. The storm had grown fierce enough to drive most townspeople indoors, leaving the narrow streets empty, save for the occasional hurried vicar rushing past his shop. The shelves around him held countless glass vials, each labeled in his careful hand. Some contained common remedies: feverfew, chamomile, willow bark, while others held rarer substances, their contents gleaming mysteriously in the firelight. A collection of surgical tools lay clean and ready on a worn wooden table, their polished surfaces reflecting the warm glow of fat burning lamps. It was then that the door burst open with a gust of wind and rain. A knight staggered in, one hand pressed onto their side, the other steadying themselves against the doorframe. Water dripped from their armor onto the stone floor. "I require treatment," the knight said, voice muffled by their helmet. Despite the obvious pain, they remained rigidly upright. The apothecary moved quickly to examine the wound. "You'll need to remove some armor. The cut needs proper cleaning." "No." The knight stepped back. "Bind it as it is. I cannot remove the armor." "That will lead to infection. At least let me. Just bind it," the knight insisted, tension clear in their voice. I can pay well." The apothecary frowned, but gathered his supplies. As he approached with clean bandages, he noticed the quality of the armor. Fine steel worked with subtle details that marked royal craftsmanship. Yet there were no identifying marks or heraldry. An unusual combination that raised questions he knew better than to ask. Thunder rolled overhead as he began his work, the night remaining silent and still beneath his hands. The wound was deep, but clean, made by a sharp blade rather than a ragged weapon. Another detail that didn't match the typical tavern brawl or bandit attack. But that, too, he kept to himself. He worked carefully in the flickering light, cleaning what he could reach of the wound through gaps in the armor. The knight's breathing was measured but strained, each small movement carefully controlled. Despite their rigid posture, he could sense their growing weakness. Whatever had caused this wound, the knight was far from safety, and and refusing proper treatment would only worsen their condition. As he reached for more bandages, a flash of lightning illuminated the shop. In that brief moment, he caught a glimpse of something that made him pause. A subtle pattern etched into the armor's shoulder plate. One he'd definitely seen before in the royal court's guard. But before he could process this detail, thunder crashed overhead, and the night swayed slightly, their composed facade beginning to crack. The apothecary bent closer to examine the wound, frowning as he noticed an unusual purple tinge at its edges. His fingers froze. He knew that color, a telltale sign of nightshade-based poison, the kind used exclusively by royal assassins. The wound is poisoned, he said quietly, straightening up. You need the armor off. Now. The knight stiffened. Impossible. Just bind it, and He'll be dead by dawn. He moved to his shelves, quickly gathering ingredients. The poison's already spreading. See how your fingers tremble? The knight looked down at their gauntleted hand, now visibly shaking. You're certain? Purple-tipped nightshade. Royal court poison. I've seen it before. He began grinding herbs with swift, practiced movements. It'll reach your heart within hours, without treatment. Thunder crashed outside as the night seemed to wage an internal battle. Finally, they spoke, voice weaker than before. You cannot tell anyone what you see. I take confidences seriously, but we're wasting time. The knight struggled with the armor clasps, movements growing clumsy. The apothecary stepped forward to help, carefully removing the chest plate. The wound beneath was worse than he thought. Purple veins spreading outward, like dark lightning. The helmet, he insisted, mixing herbs into a paste. The poison will affect your mind soon. I will need to check your eyes for. The knight swayed suddenly, catching themselves against a table. Vials rattled. No, I cannot. You can, and you must. He stepped closer, voice firm. Now. With trembling hands, the knight reached for their helmet. There was a moment of hesitation. Then they lifted it away. Long dark hair fell free, framing a face the apothecary had never thought to see again. Despite the years between then and now, he knew those eyes immediately. The princess held his gaze, chin lifted despite her obvious weakness. Hello, Thomas, she said softly. He stared, words failing him. The girl he'd loved in secret, the princess who'd been his childhood friend until duty separated them. She stood before him now, poisoned and in disguise. Your Highness, he managed finally, healer's instincts warring with shock. She stumbled then, poison taking its toll. He caught her automatically. Years of formality forgotten in urgency. She felt smaller without the armor, more like the girl he remembered. Well, she said, attempting a weak smile. This isn't quite how I imagined seeing you again. The poison's purple traces were spreading visibly now. Dark veins creeping up her neck. Her skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and her breathing grew more labored. Thomas pushed aside his shock and confusion, forcing himself to focus on the immediate threat. must act quickly, he said, guiding her to a chair. The poison is spreading faster than I feared. He turned back to his workbench, hands moving swiftly among his supplies. I need to know exactly when you were wounded. I think 2 hours ago, she managed, gripping the chair's arms as another wave of dizziness hit. 2 hours ago, just outside the city's walls. Thomas calculated quickly. 2 hours. The poison would reach her heart by dawn. Less time than he'd hoped. But enough if they worked quickly. He refused to consider the alternative. Not when he just found her again. Even under these impossible circumstances. Stay with me, he urged, reaching for his strongest antidote herbs. We have work to do. Thomas worked quickly at his bench, crushing herbs with shaking hands as he tried to process the reality before him. The princess, Elizabeth, sat watching him, her beautiful face growing paler by the minute. I need to know what really happened, he said, keeping his voice steady. Still direct as ever. She managed a weak laugh that turned into a cough. Some things haven't changed. Many things have changed, Your Highness. He emphasized the title slightly, measuring dried foxglove with careful precision. Don't. She gripped the chair tighter as another wave of dizziness hit. Please, don't call me that. Not here. Not now. He added the foxglove to his mortar, grinding it perhaps harder than necessary. What should I call you then? The knight who burst into my shop? The princess who vanished from court without a word? The girl who... He stopped himself, focusing on the herbs. The girl who broke your heart. Her voice was quiet. We need to focus on the poison, he said firmly, though his hand had stilled. I am seeing signs of nightshade, but there's something else. Something that's making it spread faster. She nodded, professional despite her growing weakness. Monkshood, probably. They've been experimenting with combinations. They? Who exactly is trying to kill you, Elizabeth? She met his gaze, and for a moment he saw past the years of separation to the girl who used to sneak out of the castle gardens to meet him. Members of my court, my own court. I've been investigating corruption, getting too close to the truth, apparently. Thomas turned back to his workbench, adding ingredients to a copper pot, heating over the fire. The familiar motions helped steady him. That explains the disguise. No, I never thought I'd see you in armor. You'd be surprised what I've learned to do. She watched him work, eyes growing unfocused. I needed to become more than just a princess in a tower. And now, you're a poisoned knight in an apothecary shop. He stirred the mixture, trying to keep his tone light despite his growing concern. poison was now spreading faster. "At least," she said softly, "at least it brought me back to you." He nearly dropped his spoon, but before he could respond, she slumped forward, consciousness finally giving way to the poison's effects. Thomas caught her just before she hit the floor, his heart racing with both old feelings and new fear. The antidote wasn't ready, and time was running out. "You need to stay awake," Thomas said, supporting Elizabeth as she stirred back to consciousness. "The antidote requires multiple stages, and I need your help." She blinked, forcing her eyes to focus. Then tell me what to do." He helped her to the workbench, keeping one arm around her waist as she swayed. "First, we need to counteract the nightshade. Then, the monk's hood. But something's making them work together unusually well." As he worked, combining ingredients with swift precision, Elizabeth watched his hands. "You were always good at this. Even in the castle gardens, you knew every plant's purpose." "The poison's affecting your mind," he said quietly. "It's making you speak thoughts you'd usually keep hidden." "Truth serum," she managed, a weak laugh. "Of course. They are clever." She gripped the bench as another wave of dizziness hit. "Though perhaps not as clever as they think." Thomas added crushed belladonna berries to his mixture, trying to focus on the task rather than her words. "This first stage needs to simmer for exactly 7 minutes. Count with me. It'll help keep you alert." remember how we used to count stars in the garden? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Every night, until they called me back inside. He kept stirring, jaw tight. Elizabeth, I kept every letter you sent me, she continued, the truth serum loosening her tongue. Even after I had to stop replying. Father's orders, of course. A princess couldn't be seen corresponding with a commoner. His voice was sharp, but his hands remained steady as he measured out the next ingredients. With anyone who made me happy. She reached for a jar he needed. They were afraid I'd choose differently. Choose you. The mixture bubbled, giving off purple steam. Thomas added powdered herbs, counting under his breath. You made your choice clear enough. Did I? Her voice crackled. Or did I just do what was expected? What they told me would keep you safe. He paused, looking at her properly for the first time since the revelation. Keep me safe. They threatened to have you removed from the city. Permanently. The truth spilled out like water. I couldn't be the reason. Thomas's hands stilled on the mortar. So, you pushed me away instead. It seemed kinder than having you killed. She smiled bitterly. Though watching you leave nearly killed me anyway. The mixture turned a dangerous red. Thomas quickly added more herbs, forcing himself to focus. The monk's hood is reaching your heart. We need to work faster. She nodded, then stumbled. He caught her again, and for a moment, they were too close. Years of separation evaporating in shared breath. I never stopped, she whispered, the truth serum pulling words from her heart. Loving you, I mean. Thomas's hands tightened on her arms. Elizabeth, the poison is making me honest. Finally. She met his gaze steadily despite her weakness. Every time I heard news of your success, your healing work, I was so proud and so lonely. He helped her back to her chair, movements gentle despite his turmoil. We need to focus on saving your life. The past is right here. She interrupted. In this shop, with both of us finally speaking truth. The antidote bubbled, demanding attention. Thomas returned to his work, adding the final ingredients with trembling hands. If you survive this, what then? You're still a princess. I'm still the man I should have fought for. Her voice was growing weaker, but her words remained clear. Perhaps that's why I'm here. The poison brought me back to you, but the truth serum, that's showing me what I need to do next. The antidote turned a clear, bright blue. Thomas lifted it from the fire, heart pounding with more than just urgency. It's ready. But Elizabeth, the things you're saying are what I've wanted to say for years. She reached for the antidote with shaken hands. Now, are you going to help me live long enough to prove it? final stage is complicated, Thomas said, holding the bright blue antidote. It requires blood from both of us. A binding agent. Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. You mean blood magic? I wouldn't have thought you'd... I learned many things. After leaving, he replied, preparing a small knife. Some less orthodox than others. The candlelight cast dancing shadows as he carefully cut his palm, letting drops fall into the antidote. The liquid hissed and darkened. Your turn, he said softly, offering her the knife. Their fingers brushed as she took it. The truth serum's getting stronger, she warned. Whatever I say next, then perhaps we should work quickly. But he didn't move away as she made her cut. Their blood mixing in the potion. The antidote began to glow, casting their faces in ethereal light. There are positions, she said suddenly, words rushing out. At court, a royal physician is needed. Someone trusted. Someone who could work closely with the princess. Thomas still. Elizabeth, I've watched you build this. She gestured at his shop. Your independence, your reputation. I know what I'm asking you to give up. Do you? His voice was rough. Last time I was at court was different. I was different. She gripped his arm, leaving a small, bloody handprint. I'm not that scared girl anymore. I'm offering you a choice this time, not taking it away. The antidote pulsed between them, growing brighter. And what of your court conspirators? They'll be dealt with. But I need... She swayed slightly, poison still coursing through her. I need someone I can trust. Someone who knows both medicine and truth. Thomas looked at their mixed blood in the glowing potion. Years of longing, warring with hard-earned wisdom. The court nearly destroyed us once. Then help me change it. Her eyes were bright, not just as my physician, as my partner, The word hung unspoken between them as Thomas lifted the antidote. Drink first. Live. Then we'll discuss terms. She took the vial with trembling hands. I mean every word. Poison or no poison. I know, he said softly. That's what terrifies me. The antidote glowed brighter as she drank. Their mingled blood carrying healing through her veins. The purple traces of poison began to fade from her skin. But the truth serum's effects intensified. I dream of you, she confessed, words spilling out. Dreams of what could have been, of what still could be. Thomas turned away, checking her pulse. Professional mask slipping. Elizabeth, please. No, listen. She caught his hand. Their blood still mingling. I'm offering you more than a position. I'm offering you a way to stay. To be near me without suspicion. To help me make real change. And if I refuse, then I'll respect your choice. But know this. I'm not leaving your life again. Position or no position. I'll find ways to see you, to work with you, to... He pressed a finger to her lips, stopping the flow of truth. The antidote needs time to work. Rest. But she gripped his wrist, moving his hand away. No more waiting. No more silence. The poison brought me here. But this truth serum is making me brave. I love you, Thomas. Still. Always. And I'm tired of pretending duty means denying my heart. Thunder crashed outside as Thomas struggled with her words, with the reality of this moment. The princess he'd loved and lost, now offering him everything he'd ever dreamed of. But at what cost? Your life at the court, he began carefully. Your responsibilities will be easier with someone I trust at my side. She touched his face, her hand still bearing traces of their mingled blood. Someone who knows both healing and truth. Someone who can help me transform the court instead of being transformed by it. The antidote's glow was fading, but something else was growing stronger between them. Something that had survived years of separation, duty, and denial. Dawn comes soon, he said finally. The antidote will need watching through the night. She smiled, reading acceptance in his words. Then we have hours yet to plan our future. The storm raged outside, but inside the shop, truth and healing worked their magic as two hearts once torn apart found their way back to each other. Thomas hovered beside Elizabeth, watching the slow return of color to her cheeks. The antidote had finally purged the poison from her system. She breathed more easily now, though an exhausted tremor still ran through her limbs. That was close, he murmured, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead. The feverish heat had receded, leaving her skin cool and clammy. Another hour, and I might have been too late. She managed a small, wry smile. Then I owe you my life, again. He shook his head. You should rest. But even as she tried to lean back, her Her eyes darted around the apothecary, settling on her discarded armor. I can't stay here. My enemies will think they've won if I don't return to court. Thomas exhaled. You nearly died tonight. Give yourself time. She pushed herself upright. Time is exactly what I don't have. There's corruption in the palace. People who'd stop at nothing to see me out of the picture for good. If I'm gone too long, they'll move unopposed. Her gaze flicked to him. That's why I need you. He looked away, torn. I left to avoid these very intrigues. You know that better than anyone. I do, she said softly. Finally, Thomas reached for her hand. If you return to court, you'll be in danger every moment. I'm in danger wherever I go. She met his eyes, determination etched on her face. All I can do is meet it head on, with help from someone I trust. The words set his heart pounding. What exactly do you want me to do? I'm offering you royal physician. I trust no one else with my health or the kingdom's. Thomas let out a long breath. The memory of the council's cold marble halls tightened his chest. That's a big step. You know how they'll talk if you bring me back. Then let them talk. The only thing I care about is whether you'll accept. He thought of the early years, when there were barely more than children roaming the palace gardens, when he shouldn't have even been there. But he couldn't lose her again. Not like this. I'll do it. If it means I can keep you alive, and maybe root out the source of these attacks. I'll return to court. She squeezed his hand, a spark of that old warmth flaring between them. Thank you. I promise. This time, it'll be different. He helped her to her feet, and she tested her balance. The deep cut still twinged, but she stood taller with each breath, pressing one hand against fresh bandages. We need a plan. My father will demand answers about this wound. Thomas bent to retrieve her breastplate, carefully setting it on a table. We'll say you were ambushed outside the city walls. That's not far from the truth. As for the rest, we'll keep our findings to ourselves until we know who's behind the poison. She nodded, taking a measured step forward. Yes, we'll move quietly. Together. A faint pink light from the rising sun crept through the apothecary windows, illuminating the worn stone floor. The storm had blown over, leaving a hushed calm in its wake. Outside, a new day beckoned. Elizabeth met Thomas's gaze, and for a moment they were neither princess nor apothecary, but two souls who drifted apart and now stood on the brink of something new. She lifted her chin. Shall we? Thomas paused, letting the old fears and new hopes settle in his chest. Then he offered her a soft, resolute smile, the kind he once gave her as a boy. Lead the way, Your Highness. And side by side, they stepped out into the dawn. Despite the challenges awaiting them, palace conspiracies, suspicious courtiers, and the burden of old wounds, they carried a shared resolve to face it all together. For the first time in years, Thomas felt not only the pull of duty, but the promise of what might be if they dared to claim it.